Everything's going to go well.
Hello, and thank you all for joining today's webinar on how to build a better launch enablement plan. I'm Melanie, and I'm joined by Jeanna. We'll do a couple introductions here in a second, but we're excited to have you here, and we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. I'm going to allow just a few more people to join before we get started. Awesome. So hang tight, grab your coffee, and we should be good to go soon. Awesome. We're going to get started. Alrighty. So today's webinar is all about how to build a better launch enablement plan, right? It's a topic that we talk a lot about internally at Spekit, right? We're a fast, innovative company, constantly, pushing new product innovations to the market, to our customers internally. We're launching all sorts of concurrent beta programs and more. And, the big question is, how do we ensure that ultimately our teams are successful and that we enable them effectively? So today's webinar will be led by myself. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Spekit. I started Spekit 8 years ago, really to rethink the way that, we do enablement in the market. And I'm happy to share a little bit more later. But I'm really excited to be joined by Jeanna, who joined our team probably about 6 months ago on our product marketing function. So Jeanna, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. I'm Jeanna Roggow. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Spekit. A little background about me, I started out in digital marketing and demand gen, and then I shifted my focus to product marketing, and that's really where I kind of found my fit. So I've spent the majority of my career in high growth B2B startups. So when I saw this position at Spekit, I really jumped on it because I felt like Spekit filled that gap in product marketing that I felt over the years in terms of enablement. So I was really excited to join the team. And so here I kind of shape how we go to market and lead PMM for net new business.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeanna. Great. Well, today we're excited to talk just a little bit about the shifting landscape, why more than ever now is it important to really work through this process, both cross-functionally, as well as, as you think about enabling your customers. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're really going to go into our planning communication playbook. So this part is going to be led by Jeanna. She's really completely revamped how we do our product launches internally and how to really think about who owns what, et cetera. Then we're really going to go around going to go into the playbook for enabling and reinforcing, sharing some best practices, how we think about different frameworks for determining what level of enablement is going to be required, what should be included. And then finally, we're going to go into showing a few different examples of how you can leverage templates and AI and solutions like Spekit ultimately to simplify your product launches. So excited to cover that today. Feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A or the messages chat. Both of us will be monitoring that closely. So with that, just to give a little bit of an introduction here, we live in what we like to call at Spekit the change economy, right? The pace at which your products are evolving, your services, the pace at which the tools that your teams are using are changing. Everything is just getting faster, right? As the rate of innovation continues to increase, I work closely with our R&D team, and I see how fast they're starting to develop, right? As artificial intelligence has started to bring benefits to how they develop, to how they test their products and services, et cetera. And so as innovation continues to accelerate, we really need to think about, what's working and what's not. How are we going to help our teams keep pace with the level of change that we're now seeing on a weekly or daily basis that used to happen maybe on a quarterly basis? And so as this rate of innovation has dramatically increased, so has the urgency to drive revenue and execute, right? The competitive landscape is only getting hotter, more consolidation, more adjacent competitors that are now starting to encroach in your space that you need to now compete against. And ultimately, we all have revenue goals. And this market is one that really only rewards, companies that both grow and grow efficiently. Now, as this pressure has increased, and we're feeling it across every part of the business, from your pressure on your product, your pressure on your reps and your CSMs, so has the gap between how you used to do things, how teams used to enable, how teams used to document, how teams used to communicate change, and their effectiveness, right? Because as this velocity has increased, the effectiveness of these old playbooks, hey, let's get everyone together and do these large scale trainings once a quarter or do these product certifications, those just can't keep pace with that, with how fast things are moving nowadays. And the reality is that that has a real consequence on your business, right? Because when you think about kind of like the bringing a product to market curve, there's the initial phase, which is kind of like, the build phase. And in this example, I'm taking a pretty simple feature, right? So let's say it's a few months of building. Then you've got what I would consider the launch phase, right? That's kind of like the testing, maybe beta programs. Then you're starting to put all the materials together, and then you've got the launch date. And then oftentimes there's a huge gap between when you launch it and when you actually start seeing the benefits in your revenue, right? And what I would call monetization. And that wasted time is really what I think every single person that's involved in enablement, product marketing, product, et cetera, should all be working together to reduce, right? How fast can we launch something and actually start seeing profitability and monetization from it? And this is where I really believe that it comes down to enablement, right? How fast are you enabling, of course, your customers? And we could do a whole separate webinar on that, but ultimately, how fast are you enabling your internal teams to properly message, position, demo, compete, handle objections, and more on all this new functionality? And the reality is that, like, if you haven't quite cracked the code today, it's only going to keep getting harder, right? According to Salesforce, they interviewed 5,000 reps. 57% of them believe that competition has gotten tougher this year compared to last. And I'd say most of them would agree that competition was already pretty tough last year, right? So as you think about win rates and close rates, that's really important. And then 67% of sales reps don't expect to meet their quota. And last year, 84% missed it. So, when you think about how do you grow as a business, how do you ensure that you're, ultimately growing your revenue, you need your reps to feel confident that they can hit their goals. You need them to feel confident that they can ultimately meet their quota. And we believe that ultimately enablement is one of the biggest answers to helping bridge that gap. Now, before we go into that phase, I want to pass it on to Jeanna here to talk a little bit about our planning and communication playbook. And the goal is that, this is a framework. This is the one that we use. This is the one that we've iterated on, but that, you can take inspiration from it, et cetera. And we'll be sharing some templates and more at the end and following up via email so that you can get some of these resources to use internally. But without further ado, off you, Jeanna.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. All right. So what is the product launch reality we're all facing, right? We've spoken with countless product marketing and enablement professionals, and a clear theme that we've seen across the board is that product launches often feel very reactive, right? And I'm sure a lot of you have done a lot of launch planning in similar tools to, what's shown here, ClickUp. But the reality is that studies show that 54% of teams lack functional handoffs between product, marketing, and sales. And because of that, even with the best project management tools in place, many launches still suffer from disconnected handoffs to misaligned teams and this mindset where teams treat launch day like it's the finish line. But in reality, like Mel mentioned, that is just the beginning of the process because a product launch isn't just a one-day event. So at Spekit, we've learned that the way to kind of mitigate that very reactive feeling of a product launch is to lean into 3 key areas in the launch planning process. The first one is getting a really crisp idea of what our roles are, right? So before you can get started, you need to define who's doing what. The second is aligning on the actual size of your launch. So not everything needs, let's say, a full playbook, and not every launch, release, or new functionality, et cetera, holds the same weight. And then third, make sure that everyone knows which tier includes what, right? So from meetings required to GTM and enablement deliverables to the tools involved, those activities and responsibilities need to be clearly defined so no one's guessing midway through what they have to do. So we're going to go to the next slide. Yeah. All right. So first and foremost, who actually owns the GTM motion? Having clear roles and responsibilities, like I said, here will help you understand how all the different cross-functional teams kind of come together. There are so many different stakeholders in the GTM machine, but for us at Spekit, we really look at 5 key roles, which are product ops, sales enablement, RevOps, and then PMM. And this is for us, and I'm in product marketing. PMM is kind of like the nucleus of them all. So we are the ones kind of driving the product launch efforts. But at other companies, that may be held by sales enablement. So for these roles, product, they're the ones who guide the product development, product ops. They're the ones who support the product team. They're ensuring that the processes, ops trainings, project decisions, et cetera, are all executed efficiently. Sales enablement is in charge of sales readiness. So they're equipping the frontline sellers with the right materials, trainings, knowledge, all of that they need to actually sell that new product or feature. And then RevOps removes silos across the team. So they should streamline the process involved, from lead generation to sales outreach to customer onboarding, et cetera, support tooling. And then product marketing is the team who really is driving that messaging, positioning. We're the ones in charge of the actual go-to-market launch. We drive adoption and measure revenue and market success.
Absolutely. And I'd say like one call out is recently we actually forgot to involve RevOps in one of our launches because frankly, we thought we had it covered across all the other functions. And then we realized later that one of the things that we do on our opportunities, right? So in our CRM, whenever our reps are working deals, is that we track requested features, right? So for in a competitive deal, what are some of the requested features that are coming up that are ultimately leading to us, potentially losing a deal when we do win-loss analysis, and that really helps us ultimately. That's one of the key data points we use to drive the roadmap. And of course, in addition to getting that in conversation intelligence tools, et cetera. And what we realized basically a month post-launch is that as we launched one of these like big new products, we hadn't updated our requested features list. And so basically we'd had a month of calls where we hadn't actually in the CRM logged all the new related feature requests that were coming on that new product. And so it's just a very simple example where not having the right people in the room means that you might, overlook some of those small, simple changes that ultimately affect, how you're monitoring how a launch is going, how is it landing, is it landing? And again, these are more leading indicators, right? Win rate, close revenue, especially with, sales cycles that are typically 3 months or so tend to be lagging indicators. So we try and identify what are some of those leading indicators and where are you, ultimately measuring them. So that's just a simple example of like where not having one of those people in the room can ultimately lead to, to a small miss.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so like I created that slide for us as our go-to-market launch playbook, and we just iterated on it and updated it to include RevOps so we don't forget that team because it's so critical to launching a product. All right, so outside of the actual roles and responsibilities, alignment on language and definitions matter. So we've standardized at Spekit terms like alpha, beta, release, GA, to keep teams internally aligned on what's ready, who owns it, what needs to happen next. So the DRIs are the teams responsible for each one of these launch phases or categories. Here are what work for us at Spekit, but kind of depending on your company's segment or industry or product line, the teams responsible for each one of these things may play different roles. All right, so once you have your framework in place for your launch and the phases kind of standardized, you can then determine the impact of the tiers on your business or your pipeline, revenue, et cetera. Again, here, tier 1 is going to have the biggest impact. It's the largest launch and you're putting the most effort behind it, whereas a tier 4 will have the lowest impact. And down at this end, these releases will be felt the least across everyone, if at all, and will require very little GTM or enablement activities. And this model in particular helps us at Spekit kind of right-size our effort and our researching and our messaging based on the level of impact that we're seeing. And it's not then based on a gut feeling or a specific team or stakeholder asking for a specific tier. We know, hey, if it meets this criteria, then it'll be tiered accordingly.
Yeah. And I think just one call out here, we'll talk a little bit more into when we shift to the enablement section. But one of the mistakes, I'd say, or one of the learnings we had is that we used to classify basically like our, what I would consider kind of like external go-to-market tier for a product launch, the same as the enablement tier. We didn't distinguish between the two. And what we've realized is that even though some capabilities that you might launch might not necessarily be like the biggest, most exciting net new market expansion capabilities, right? So that might be like a large integration that you're launching that like is really, really excited to like your existing customer base and to new customers, but you're not necessarily going to be doing, a press release and all those exciting things around it. From an enablement standpoint, driving those behavior changes is significant. And so what you're going to see here is that these tiers are really speaking to basically the level of effort that we're going to place and the kinds of goals and measurements that we're going to put in place when it comes to bringing the product to market externally facing. It doesn't necessarily have to do with how we're going to be enabling on it internally, which we'll distinguish that in a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great call out. Thank you, Mel, because again, those external activities that we're going to talk about here and the internal enablement activities do not have to be paired. Sometimes they will look very different across different tiers of launches. All right, so now that we've mapped out kind of the different tiers on external facing things, this is where they translate into those external activities. So for really high impact launches, we'll have full scale campaigns where there are numerous external facing net new activities. And by net new, I mean we're not iterating on something that we already have, or we're not updating existing documentation or materials. We're creating brand new assets for this type of launch. And not everything will be net new, but a lot of them in a tier one will be. For lower tiers, however, there's a much smaller lift, and many of the GTM activities are more on that update end instead of the net new creation. Now, I imagine you're thinking, like, what about those enablement activities with these? Kind of like what Mel was saying. Again, you don't have to tie go-to-market activities and external facing things with enablement efforts. And Mel will kind of go through that a little more.
And one special call out, I'd say, I'm realizing I don't think we have a specific slide on it, Jeanna, but I do want to raise it here. I'd say what's been really painful in the past is not only the fact that like this is just a long list of materials and assets, et cetera, to create. And then when you pair it with all the enablement resources, it's massive too. But it feels sometimes that, or at least in the past, it felt like we were almost reinventing the wheel, right? Where we were dividing and conquering the work. So it's like, okay, this team over here is working on, let's say, like the newsletter updates. This team over here is working on the help center updates, and things were, we had to divide and conquer, but we weren't starting necessarily with like, what is the upfront work? And so what we're really, really focused on is making sure now that like with every single feature that we build, we have what we call a product brief. It's a document that the product team puts together that really outlines, why we're building this, what are the goals around it, what are the metrics that we're hoping to drive within from a usage standpoint or from a business impact. We're including things like what's in scope, right? And what's not. And then like if there's, what's going to be included in the beta phase versus GA. So that's really kind of like the high level, like what's in product. Then the PMM team actually takes that document and puts it in what we use Gemini gem, but you can do this in ChatGPT too, where we take that and then we've already trained that gem with our general messaging and positioning. So we ask it to then basically, we have a template that we use for messaging and positioning. And then we basically take that product brief and then create a general, like, here's a high level messaging and positioning outline for this new functionality. And in there, again, we're going to, we use AI to get, I'd say 80% of the way there, leveraging all of our existing trained, messaging. Then we then customize it. And then we basically use that as the nucleus to then auto generate as much of these materials as possible. But if you don't do it in that order and you don't have that kind of centralized product brief that's up to date, and then that centralized go-to-market messaging and positioning doc, it'll feel like a lot of extra work. And so I think that's just something that we've really learned, especially as we're adapting our processes to try and include AI in everything we do to move faster. And frankly, with the pace at which our product is evolving, we have to think about ways to move faster. That's a big one. We're also leveraging AI to actually connect directly. We use Jira as a product management tool. And so that contains a lot of like the more granular technical requirements around different features and user acceptance testing, et cetera. And so just this week, actually, our team developed an internal tool where it's basically going to take all of those tickets as well as the product brief to then generate technical release notes for our support team. So trying to find ways throughout the process to leverage AI to generate as much of this documentation as possible, and definitely something that I'm interested in finding ways to automate within our product as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too, because I think I've been on both ends of before AI. I was doing all of those different activities by myself, net new. They can be templatized to a certain extent, but really it's like you're generating all of this new stuff, and it just takes so much time. But now with the advent of AI and how we're utilizing it, it doesn't take nearly as long as it used to. So it's been really exciting to kind of see that shift. All right, so now that we've kind of like talked through the launches and the defined tiers and mapping it back to specific external facing activities, we have found that like you need very clear swim lanes defined. If everyone is seen as responsible for something, no one's responsible for anything, and then chaos ensues. So at Spekit we use RACI, but you can use whatever responsibility assignment matrix that works for your company. Another common one is the rapid method, but I personally love a good RACI. So for us, that outlines who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and/or informed for every deliverable for a product launch. And we use it across product and PMM, enablement, ProdOps, to stay ahead of any miscommunications or scrambles that might happen. And those are the ones that cause us to feel very reactive. So here you can see an example of what a RACI for both internal and external facing activities in a product launch look like, but really you can develop any sort of RACI or rapid method that works best for your company. So you're defining who does what, when, and why, essentially.
Yeah. And I will say, these are all, I'd say, frameworks that we follow, I would say probably 80% of the time, like being, let's be honest, like we're not perfect, and like no company is going to, follow processes perfectly every single time. At the end of the day, people jump in when there's help and support. But I do think that this ultimately helps drive one of our core values is owning it, right? And it's all around like accountability and ownership, and like just being able to, point someone a certain direction if they need support or something's not happening. And so it's definitely helped us in delineating ultimately who's responsible, so that it's not there's not duplicative work, because we've definitely fallen in that bucket before, and ultimately someone knows how to prioritize their time based on what they're going to be expected to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So then kind of once you have that RACI in place and you know who is supposed to be doing what, this is kind of what it looks like in practice. And again, depending on the tier, we'll stagger timelines for content and enablement and product readiness, et cetera. So this timeline isn't a task list by any means. It's really that like shared roadmap that helps us keep momentum, and most importantly, like set expectations. It also allows us on the marketing and enablement side to better partner with R&D. If they know that we need, let's say, a 4-month lead time for a tier 1 launch, there's no surprises at the end of a launch, right? The teams aren't scrambling. You're not feeling that reactiveness as if you were to say, hey, we're going to do a tier 1 launch, but we're only going to give you, let's say, 30 days out. So having that clear timeline will really help you move forward with a shared goal in mind.
Yeah. And I'd say on average, we try and aim for about like quarterly big releases. We'll typically have like 1 or 2, what I would consider tier 1 releases per quarter. This quarter, actually, we didn't have a full tier 1 release because we had one last quarter. And this quarter, we actually focused more on just like basically how do we mature a lot of the functionality that we've launched. And so it'll vary by company. I'd say in the past, we had more time. In some cases, you just have compressed timelines, right? Even though it's a tier 1 release, it doesn't mean that it necessarily took a tier 1 time to build, right? And that's happening increasingly too. For example, we built deal rooms earlier this year, and our original estimates were actually longer for it than it took place. And so there's a little bit of crunch time. And I think that's only speaking to just like how much faster teams are developing, which is super exciting. But I would anticipate these timelines to continue to compress. And that's where really making sure that your collaboration, your swim lanes are super clear, and then figuring out, what are all the different ways along the path that you can use AI to automate some of that documentation, some of those updates is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. This is kind of like the idealistic way that you can go about it. But to Mel's point, no one launch fits a specific template each time. So you do definitely have to kind of stay on your toes and make sure that you can iterate and hey, because I don't have this much time to do this, at least I know, who is responsible for what, essentially.
Now, before you go into this, Jeanna, I actually just want to call this out. So I will say at the end of the day, we're an enablement company, but I laugh that we're a documentation company, right? And so we really try and be our best users. And I'd say we try and document like everything we do internally, because I think documentation is the gift to your future self. And so, yes, Alexa, I love that you called it out. Simply, it's spectacular. We have a rating for that. We want to make sure that everything that we meets our standard for being a Simply It's Spectacular feature. But we were doing most of our collaboration across functions async, right? And I'm going to actually show some of what that looks like in a bit here, some of the templates we use, et cetera, in the product. But still, there was just things that were falling through the cracks, and there was still time, we're moving fast, and things were, really the more tactical refinements of like, wait, who's going to get communicated to and what? And so actually prior to Jeanna joining, we instituted a biweekly product launch meeting. And that meeting, it's an expensive meeting in the sense that there's a lot of folks in it, right? You've got R&D leadership. I join it, I'd say about half the time, but we typically have our president and COO. We have a representative from our CS team. We have enablement. We have P&M product. It's a big meeting. We are very organized around it. So there's a lot of pre-work that happens for it just as part of it. But that meeting is where we go over like all the upcoming launches, especially the ones where there's going to be go-to-market alignment, making sure that we're super clear on what the go-to-market plan is, what's required. Has there been any shifts in like what's actually launching or not? And then separately, we also use that meeting to go over any recent launches, or if something's in beta, going through the metrics. So this is one for a more, upcoming launch versus one that's recently launched. We started, this is an example. We actually use we document this in what we call a spec in our product, but we put this in a slide here so that you can see what it looks like in a slide format. But this kind of just quick summary that is updated every other week, making sure that we're super clear on what's coming. So anyway, Jeanna, I'll let you touch on that, but I just want to give a little bit of context around how that came about and why at the end of the day, we decided to add a meeting for it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because you don't want to like bog yourself down with a bunch of different meetings. But I do feel like our bi-weekly product launches meeting in particular is really necessary for all stakeholders involved to kind of understanding what's coming down the pike, right? So everyone across the organization can go and look up status or find assets or understand responsibilities and stay aligned without those like frantic one-off Slacks or pings or async meetings that don't really have any other purpose than just to find status of what's happening. So kind of like what Mel was saying, we do this in our own platform, but you don't have to. If you don't have our tooling or any tooling in place, a simple Google slide with a template like this will work basically anytime, right? So you just need a single source of truth for that planning, the communication, and the execution of what a product launch looks like with your stakeholders involved. So this is a template you can use. Otherwise, if you have a different tool, you can put it in place there. But having this type of thing accompanied with a bi-weekly meeting just to stay aligned, I think is really necessary, especially as you're leading up to some of those bigger tier 1 launches.
Love it. Thank you, Jeanna. Awesome. So this is really, I'd say, a lot of the pre-work that happens, right? And there's communication that happens. We use Slack as our collaboration tool, but we have different channels that we set up, which we'll speak to. We didn't go in detail into like each different part of the collaboration process, but we typically have an initiative channel for each one. So there's quite a bit that happens up front. And then this section that I'm going to talk about is really like what our enablement process looks like. How do we determine what to enable on, what that's going to look like, et cetera, as we launch something. So I love reminding people that launch day is just the start, right? And it's crazy because as, a team and as a product company, you spend so much time, building and testing and anticipating the launch. But the reality is that the real work begins really like right after launch, right? You're going to do your big kumbaya. Everyone's going to be excited. You're going to do your big social post. It's going to feel like a win, and it should. It's a huge milestone, but it's just the first milestone, right? The real work begins in terms of customer education adoption, along with monetization, which is really where the enablement piece comes into play immediately after launch. And I think that this is where I'd say most teams, most companies typically fall short. I'd put ourselves in that bucket too in the past, where, we do the big launch day, we do a big training, and then kind of crickets. There's a little bit of reinforcement here and there, but that's about it. And so this slide, I talk a lot about this topic in my book. I think that at the end of the day, companies are really good at change management, right? The upfront planning, coordination, collaboration, but change enablement, which I would say encompasses really the more human elements, right? The communication, the documentation, the training, the enablement is where oftentimes there's a lot less time and people dedicated, right? Because in the change management phase, you've got all your technical resources, project managers, program managers, product ops, like all those people that we just spoke to. And then in the change enablement phase, which is really like where you're going to start seeing results from all this work, right? If your reps aren't demoing it, if they're not mentioning it on calls, if they're using wrong messaging, like what's the point, right? And I think the problem is that we don't dedicate enough time here. And so here I'm going to walk through a few different tips as well. So the first one is, I think it's really important to align on enablement t-shirt sizes. We use tiers to determine the product launch in terms of the go-to-market and kind of product engagement. We use t-shirt sizes just to delineate between the two to really designate, how big of a change is it going to be for our internal teams, and what does that enablement level look like in terms of the activities associated. Then, this is something that I just recommend in general. Like we really try to like never start from scratch on anything. Just as I spoke earlier about the go-to-market things, we also talk about that internally, right? So like of all of the internal enablement resources, whether it's objection handling, competitive battle cards, et cetera, where can we use templates? Where can we, ultimately start there? And then finally, how do you make sure that you're communicating those changes and reinforcing that behavior? And so with that, the first question is like, well, what level of enablement do your reps require? And we had a slight variation of this. I'm actually going to use, yesterday we had Kira, we held a workshop on this topic at our Denver office. And I invited Kira, who leads enablement over LinkedIn's Talent Solutions over, and she actually used the concept of small behavior change versus big behavior change. And I love that language because ultimately that's what it is, right? How big of a behavior change is it going to be for your teams in terms of, needing to change the way they communicate, who they communicate to, the demos, et cetera. And then how innovative and differentiated is your product? That's what we like to use versus is this expected market functionality? And so to give an example, like what we would consider an Excel change is, is something that's both really new and exciting and differentiated in the market, but it's also going to require big behavior change for your reps. And so that's where we're typically going to have a larger comprehensive strategy where we're going to have workshops and updates and structured learning in addition to the just-in-time reinforcement, right? So an example of that, which I can show later, is our deal rooms functionality because of the kind of the unique take we have on it, as well as our new AI sidekick like assistant, right? Lots of product training, lots of new positioning, new personas, you name it. What we consider a large product change is one where there's a big behavior change, meaning there's like new demo flows, new talk tracks, et cetera. But I'd say it's expected functionality. So for example, last year we launched new content integrations, right? So Google Drive, SharePoint, et cetera. While that was exciting for us and big for our existing customers, at the end of the day, most content platforms have those. And so while it was a big training effort and enablement effort, it wasn't necessarily something super exciting to market. And so the way that, the effort required is going to be slightly different. Now, what we consider a medium change is one where it's a smaller behavior change, but it's new and different. So for example, this is where you can use a little bit more async learning, which we'll talk about with our product playlist, or combined with just-in-time guidance. So an example of that was we launched content recommendations, which are AI-driven recommendations in our just-in-time assistant, so that, if a rep is writing an email or reviewing a gong call, we'll scan that and recommend content from your library for it. The reality is that there's not a big behavior change for reps because it's right there. They don't need to like do anything. It just shows up. So our reps and our CSMs didn't need to like go through intensive training on it. The value proposition is relatively, obvious, but it was differentiated. So there isn't a huge amount of enablement there. And then finally, what I would consider, expected functionality and small behavior change. That's maybe some small admin things on your, thank you, Timmy. Those are like some small changes. For example, like we added different types of metadata on our documentation, right? That's really going to be just like here's an FYI that you need to know so that if the rep stumbles upon it, they can quickly ask a question, get an answer, but we're not going to make, waste a lot of time distracting our reps to learn that. And so similarly, and again, I won't go through each one of these, we then align on what are the enablement activities by launch. Now, this is a very granular list. We literally list out what specific content is required here. So I'm not going to go through each one, but this is where we use a combination of what I'll show in a bit here, which is like a playlist of the content that you're going to create. You might actually get a demo in what we call our Spectacular Team Tuesdays, which is our all hands. So typically we'll have a section in that where the product team can demo new functionality. Again, that's great for like what I would consider Excel or large changes. Otherwise, if it's a smaller change, we might do like an async. So anyway, we'll delineate between these changes to determine ultimately what the enablement activities are. And it's really important to do that upfront in the planning process, because all this work needs to happen, right? And leading up to the change. But having this alignment and getting your head of sales, your head of CS, and ideally a couple reps or managers to agree on the level of change it is going to be really helpful. And I'll go through some of these examples, but with everything, I think one of the big challenges is like, you can create a lot of content, you can create great trainings, you can like put in all this work. But the challenge, I think, and it's the one that I believed in since day one, is really the delivery problem, right? At the end of the day, you can spend a lot of time creating a online product certification, but by the time your reps take it, the product will probably have changed, right? Like that's just how fast iterations, whether it's a UI, a UX, you're getting customer feedback, things are changing. And so the lifetime value of that product certification is frankly minimal. And at the end of the day, they're just not super effective for retention. It tends to be check the box. And so in terms of like, what outcome are you driving? It's limited in value, right? Similarly, mandatory team meetings, live trainings, right? The worst is if you schedule it at end of quarter when your reps are going into calls. But at the end of the day, I was actually talking in the office with one of our reps yesterday, and he was joining that product marketing conversation. And that's what he was highlighting. He's like, at the end of the day, like what all I'm thinking about is the meetings I've got on my calendar, what I need to prep for them, what I need to follow up. And so joining that like live training that feels really important to enablement and product marketing and product doesn't necessarily feel important to me in that moment. So I'm distracted. I'm probably writing an email on the side. And it's not because I have bad intentions, but it's because I'm just trying to prioritize what I need to ultimately close my deals. And so that's one of the limitations there too. And then, we all live in Slack, Teams, Google Meets, you name it. And there was just so many updates. One of the things that we are really, I put my foot down here is like, you can communicate something in one channel. Don't communicate it in 5 channels just to make sure everybody sees it. We need to rethink what that looks like, because every single time there's a notification, you're potentially distracting, hundreds of people depending on the size of your company. So, at the end of the day, we want to limit noise, limit distractions, and it's really difficult to measure engagement. It's difficult to measure whether people have actually seen it. That's oftentimes where we see the problem. And so email and Teams updates, Slack updates tend to be a challenge. And we know, I'm not going to spend too much time on here, but at the end of the day, this is where I think a lot of the crux of the problem is that, and I dive into it in my book on the chapter on contextual learning. I talk a little bit about memory function and how that works, and like why the forgetting curve is a thing, and how it's not just a cool, an interesting concept in a graph, but the reality is that if concepts aren't reinforced, you're going to forget them, especially now with the amount of time that we are on our phones and the amount of information that we're digesting on a day-to-day basis. Like your brain just can't retain it all. And so at the end of the day, you're doing these activities, but you're not necessarily going to actually get the outcomes, which is your reps have mastered that information, right? Because at the end of the day, there's a big time lag between when they first hear the information and when they're actually in that situation, that conversation, that follow-up, that objection handling, where they actually need that information. And not just when it comes to comprehension and attention, but also when it comes to your content. So we did a research report on the impact of enablement with the SEC, the Sales Enablement Collective, where they interviewed hundreds of sales enablement and product marketing leaders. And across the board, 86% of teams believe that their reps use less than 60% of the content that they create, right? And you can see that distribution right here. And so only 3% of teams believe that their teams use 80% or more of the content they create. So at a minimum, you're dealing with 20% of the things you're creating are just not getting used, but we know that number is a lot higher. And 70% of product marketers say that their biggest challenge is enabling sales to use the right content effectively. And so this isn't just like honestly frustrating us as someone that creates a lot of content to not have it used, but it's also just a huge waste of money and time and resources. And frankly, this environment is way too fast and competitive to afford that waste. And so the question is like, do reps just not care, right? Why aren't they doing it? And my thesis is that, I think there's just too much that we're expecting of them, right? We're expecting them to be pipeline experts and to prospect and create playbooks and forecasts. We're expecting them to be product experts, to know our products inside out and keep track of things and handle objections and competitives, We're also expecting them to be collateral experts, don't know exactly what case study and white paper and deck to use with which persona and industry in which situation. And we're also expecting them, of course, to be system experts, right? They should also know how to use the, CPQ quote that we're introducing the new product packages in, and to, know what to select and how to use, and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, the list goes on, but it's a lot, right? And it's across all these different technologies, all these different tools. And so I don't think that anyone has bad intentions, but I do think that this environment that we're in is really tough. And frankly, I don't have a silver bullet, but it is one that, we're trying to really address and solve. And the one thing that I know that science backs is that when information is reinforced and reviewed by your brain, it actually leads to retention. And so that's why I'm just such a believer in reinforcement. And reinforcement can start in all different ways, right? In your weekly sales all hands, in your one-on-ones. We do 15-5, which is a employee engagement tool. Will often add a question there related to a product launch, right? Hey, how comfortable are you feeling with deal rooms? Like, what are all the different ways that you can reinforce it? But then also, what are the different ways that you can reinforce the knowledge and the content and the information that you're creating in the most natural and effective way possible? And so that's really where we believe that, the next way of enablement technology is contextual and just-in-time content, right? So the first iteration was, let's move everything into the cloud, right? Google Drive, SharePoint kind of led that vision. The next one was, let's centralize all the information, make it easy to tag and organize. And there's a lot of amazing vendors, HighSpot, Seismic, Confluence, et cetera, that led that charge. I believe that the next iteration of that is, yes, let's make sure all that is centralized and we can manage it and analyze, et cetera, but let's actually leverage AI to surface that information where reps need it. Because if they can't find it, if they are not using it, if it's not getting reinforced, they're not going to remember it. They're not going to be able to use it. And that's ultimately why we believe that rather than having noise and communications in a lot of different places, surfacing and ideally automatically in a contextual and personalized way, the information that you are wanting your reps to ultimately use in their day-to-days is so important. And so here I'm going to go through a little bit of why just in time I think is important, but then I'm actually just going to go through some examples of those templates that I was talking about earlier, so that you guys can see what it looks like. But what we really believe is that enablement for reps, right, should be contextual. So meet them where they are in their flow of work, personalized to them and relevant to the deal they're working, to the buyer they're reaching out to, and really simple to use, right? They shouldn't have to go to multiple different places to find the information. Your training, your content, your collateral, your deal rooms, whatever it is, should be in one simple place. And that's really where we're building Sidekick, which is the just-in-time assistant related to our Spekit platform. So the Spekit platform is your centralized information. Sidekick is the assistant that follows the reps wherever they are with that information that they need. And so when you think about change management, change enablement, the old process, I should actually have this say change enablement. The old process was, or maybe the process that a lot of teams use today is, let's make a change, then let's go create a bunch of different assets in different places, then let's create different training sessions, then let's do all these different disparate follow-up tasks. What we want to figure out is, how can you do that in one single workflow, right? How can we ultimately centralize that information and reduce a lot of the redundancy by making it possible for you to document it, communicate it, reinforce it, and measure it in one single workflow? And so that's what I'll showcase today. So the first piece is really, how can you centralize information? So from a platform standpoint, we're going to show you how you can create a playlist. A playlist is a set of content for a product launch from a template. So you can have templates that you just reuse. Then you can use that playlist during a live training or to do async, right? If you're assigning it async. And then how you can send weekly product updates. Then we're going to talk about how you can communicate the change in multiple ways. Let's say you have an update. You can either send a light browser notification, you can send an email communication, or you can send what we call Spotlight, which is an in-app alert, something really to get their attention and point them to the content. So different levels of severity. By the way, all of this is part of our XLLMS ratio, where we're not sending a spotlight for every little change. We're only doing that for our Excel changes, right? So being very clear and having that repeatable playbook around how you communicate and how you reinforce is really important. And then we're going to talk about how you reinforce it, right? What are the different ways? So my favorite way is the most personalized way, which is, having it automatically happen to reps when it just happens to be relevant to them. So that's using Sidekick. But you can also create knowledge checks, right? I personally just don't believe in long form assessments and certifications. I think that they take massive amounts of time, and frankly, there is zero scientific proof that they work. There just isn't. I do believe in a recall though. And so that's why we've created like a very small, bite-sized knowledge check. It's like up to 4 questions that you can, create and make sure that people understand it, because I do think that recall is a form of reinforcement, but the long form, let's have people sit down for hours and do something, tends to have diminishing returns. And ideally, knowledge checks aren't sent the day after you take something, they're taken a couple days later. And then finally, you can embed and reinforce where it matters. And then finally, measuring, right? The most important ingredient is making sure that you're tracking internal and external adoption. And so the first one is, if you're creating knowledge checks, et cetera, you're going to want to look at, internal comprehension. How did people perform? Are people understanding? Are people getting things wrong, et cetera? Then there's internal adoption of assets, right? You've created all these resources, you've created objection handling and battle cards, et cetera. Are people using them? Are people reviewing them, et cetera? And then finally, buyer engagement. If you've created assets that your reps are sharing either, in one-off emails, or creating what we call deal room or digital sales room, where they can combine those assets, are your buyers engaging with them? How much time are they spending on it? Are you getting, positive signals that this is actually influencing pipeline and deals, so that you can ultimately help prioritize the content you're creating in the future? So I'm going to go through a few examples here. For those of you that aren't familiar with the platform, you might need to sign up for a demo to actually better understand the full platform. Today, I'm going to really just focus on specific examples for the benefit of everyone that's joining for this specific use case. But I'm going to show you all what that looks like for us internally. So let's start here. Can everybody see? Yeah. Okay, great. So you can see my screen here. So here I wanted to start by actually showing you. So this here, just for context, is our web application. So this is where you can centralize all the knowledge, content, trainings that your team has. Right now, I am in our templates parent topic, and then specifically in the product launch template. So we create templates for pretty much everything. So one of the things we do is that for product launches, we have a specific set of content, right? So typically, hey, is there a buyer persona associated with the launch? Is there battle cards, talk tracks, objection handling, product messaging? And all of these are as much as possible optimized for AI. So I'll just go in here. So this is for an example of our Spekit deal rooms. You'll see that we have, links that you can fill out, et cetera. And then we have basically prompts in here. So that then based on another asset that you upload, you say, hey, using AI, help me fill this out for this specific new feature, and it'll fill it out. So the idea is that you have templates for everything. So basically what we do is we typically clone these and add them to a topic. So you can basically clone them and add these all to another topic that you create for a specific launch. So for example, we're launching a new version of our Slack integration, hopefully in Q3. And so for that, we would basically take this, clone it, and create a new template for our Slack integration. So I'm going to exit out of here for a quick second. So to give you an idea of what an actual launch playlist looks like, here again, I'm starting in the web app. So this is the one that we created for our Spekit deal rooms functionality. So deal rooms is our latest big product, which is why I picked it. We considered it an XL change from an enablement standpoint, because it was both new functionality, but we also have our own twist on it since we have it in Sidekick. So other than, most platforms, you just go to a web app and you create deal rooms. Yes, our reps can do that too, but we also have it in Sidekick. So there's differentiation. There's a lot of benefits that we have in that. There's added features that I'll show in a few minutes that make it really different. And so we really had a big, I'd say, intensive enablement strategy for that. So what you're going to see here is that within deal rooms, we've related a few other topics, right? So we're not expecting everyone to go through the deal room competitors topic right now, but you can access that really easily here. This deal room competitors topic also lives under our general competitors topic. But here to give you an idea of what that looks like, typically you're going to have your reps go through. So this is a playlist. They can go through the high-level initiative overview. We create one of these for every single spec. So this is a similar version. This is the end user facing version of that template slide that Jeanna had showed for new features. And so here you can see it. We link out to all the related resources, right? Beta program overviews, et cetera, or slide decks that have been imported. So all the different go-to-market resources that teams want to quickly access can be found here. And I'll show you why that's important for quick and easy access later. And then a high-level overview of what the functionality is, as well as what's included, live functionality in progress. So that's a high level overview. This is meant to be more of like a knowledge doc. But then you'll see here that we also allow you to import slides and more. So here you're going to see that we have a little training playlist here for reps to go through. So here we want them to go through all this content here. This is a high level overview of what deal rooms are. Once they're done with it, they can go and mark it as reps, can know that they've actually completed it once they're done. Now, what you're going to notice here, and this is a huge belief that I have, I believe in reusing assets as much as possible. This here also happens to be the asset that we want our reps to use when they're sharing it with their customers. And so what you're going to see here is if they wanted to, they can actually create a custom of this deck here that's going to open up in Google Drive so that they can then basically customize that. They can edit, etc. So I'm creating a copy for them right here. In Google Slides that they can go through, make edits to, etc. Maybe they want to pull a slide something else. Maybe they want to personalize this to their specific buyer. But the idea is that they can like make all the changes right here that they would use. And then they can always add that to a deal room later. And so the goal is that it's really simple for them once they've made those updates to then say, hey, I now want to add this to a specific deal room. So again, a deal room is one that you would send. So let's say I wanted to add this to my deal room, I can add it right there. So the goal is that we're trying to fit into how they work versus creating new workflows. So going back to our playlist, again, go through it. The great thing is I'm going to get all the analytics as to who's looked at what and when, et cetera. Again, this is our demo org, but you can see that you can view specifically who's looked at what views, external links, who's marked things as read, and go through that. So our playlists tend to have messaging. This is actually a specific, we literally cloned our internal playlist for this, where we link to different resources as well as videos and more. So the goal is that we have lots of different types of content here that your reps can go through. So typically we'll try and keep a product launch playlist to about 8 or 9 resources that we want reps to go through. So I hope that gives everyone an overview here of what that looks like. Now, the great thing is, again, once they've gone through this, just like they would go through a typical course, the issue is how do we make sure that they can find these resources? How do we make sure they can revisit them? And so that's where we really focus, right? So we have everything from discovery questions on rip and replace to objection handling, you name it. That's really where the Spekit comes in, where we want to make sure they can easily find that information. So going back here, I'm just going to show here, you can see here, this is all the content I just viewed in the web app. I can open Spekit Sidekick, the assistant, at any point in time. And that's where, for example, that deal room initiative is super helpful because I can really quickly click to any of these resources right here. So I can favorite this as an end user for easy access and then quickly find that information. But I don't need to be going back constantly to that first, to that web app. I can find all that information right here that I can use, share, and I can do all those sections that I was just doing right here from the assistant. So with that, moving on, the next piece is, let's say that you actually have an update on deal rooms, right? You launch deal rooms and you update. We then use product updates that we send on a weekly basis every Friday to communicate updates. So here again is a copy of our updates, how we do this. What I see here is that we have a topic. I'm just going to show you all where that lives. So we have a topic called product updates, where you'll see that every single product update we have is listed right here. This all lives under product roadmap and updates. And this is, again, very similar to our production org. This is how we basically clone our demo org. So you'll see here that we have our product updates is under our product roadmap and updates, but in that product roadmap and updates topic, you can also find our 2-year vision, our external roadmap, et cetera, et cetera. But these product updates are sent in a number of different ways. So once your product update, so here our head of product creates a quick overview of here are the quick highlights, any links to where that information lives, as well as overviews on core initiatives. So for each core initiative, these are like the XL or L size projects that we have going on. You'll see that there's an update on each one and a link to the respective specs. So for every single initiative we have a high level overview. Now what that looks like is, let's pen here that I had just written this update. I'm our head of product, and now I want to communicate it. This is where you can communicate in different ways. One, you can select what teams you want to communicate it to. And then you can enter a message, hey, please make sure to review your latest update. And then we offer 3 different communication options, as I showed earlier. One is an in-app notification, which I'll show you in a second. That is a browser level notification. One is an email. One is a spotlight. So here, If I open up Sidekick, this, I could open it up anywhere. If I'd received a notification, I would get a little red dot here, and you'll see that this is an example of what that looks like here. So here I have that product update. In this case, I would have gotten the red notification, and you can see here I can view that update right here. Again, we link out to the different initiatives. So in this case, since deal rooms are a continuing initiative that we're making updates to, you'll see that we have a specific link to the core deal room initiative. So the whole goal is how to make it as simple as possible for reps to find answers. But let's say that I didn't see the update, right? That's where, as a rep, now that all this information is indexed in Spekit, whether it was uploaded via Google Drive, SharePoint, or Confluence, or whether it's documented there, I can then ask, hey, what is the latest update on deal rooms and what is coming soon, right? I'm trying to use language that reps would use. But let's say they didn't read the latest updates. We actually had one of our reps just come back from paternity leave. And so he wanted to catch up, and he was using AI Sidekick quite a bit, where here you can see that based on these recent specs, here are all the different updates, et cetera. And then here's what's coming soon based on the different resources. And then here's some additional functionality in development. And you can see here that it's pointing to our internal roadmap as well as the latest product update. And so this can be really helpful. Of course, here we're going to see that there's suggested questions, et cetera. But the whole goal is that it's really easy for folks to find answers. Now, moving forward, I'm just going to show a couple different examples just so you guys can see what that looked like. So if I'd sent that email update, it would have looked like this, right? So you're not having to recreate and reinvent efforts. In one workflow, you can send an email update, you can send that notification, or you can send a spotlight. So just to show what that looks like here, you can send what we call an in-app alert. So that was that spotlight option. And so this is really great for reinforcement. So let's say that you have been communicating that deal rooms are coming to your team, and now it's time to learn. This is where you can target an in-app alert to or spotlight to, I recommend only email, or let's say your homepage on Salesforce. And that's really to like call attention to something really important. So in this case, we use it specifically to call attention to the playlist of information. So here you're going to see, hey, there's a, deal rooms are coming. It's time to learn. Here you can view the topic, and you're going to see here that it's going to point them to that exact same topic that we were looking at in the web app with all those different resources. So again, these are just small types of reinforcement that you can use to make sure that your team knows where to find the assets and ultimately how to reinforce it. But then the reality is that they're not going to be you're not going to be pinging them constantly, right? You're going to send a spotlight, an update, and there's a cadence. You want to minimize how much you're pushing things to them. What we really want to make sure is that reps are pulling the information, right? That when they need it, they can easily find it. And so that's really where we leverage, I'd say, the AI functionality of our recommendations. Or let's say I'm a rep, I'm on an opportunity, and here, let's say that this customer in particular is interested in some of that functionality. We're competing against, and this is a demo example, of course, but you're going to see here that there's all this information here that may or may not be relevant based on who we're competing, et cetera. That's where when I open up Sidekick in Salesforce, it's going to scan the entire library here. You're seeing that it's narrowing down content. In the first place, it's going to point you to just, related content to just general guidance on opportunities, things like your security process, order form templates, et cetera. But then you're going to see that it's actually recommending content to share externally. So here you're going to see that maybe you want to showcase content related to a show pad replacement, right? And so here you can narrow down that content right here. And so you're going to see here that based on what the customer is looking for, it's determine that these resources, maybe this Spekit versus Showpad, making this up might be relevant. And of course, you can share more here, or other resources might be relevant to send. And so from here, I can really quickly add that to a deal room or share. Or I can review internal knowledge. So here you might want to review, in this case, Showpad versus Spekit. Clearly, this is a Showpad competitive opportunity. But you'll also see I can recommend, relevant resources too. Similarly, here, let's say that I'm following up with my friend Dan at Qualified. He's a dear friend. And let's say that I'm writing him an email. They use an existing vendor for their enablement needs, and they were really excited by deal rooms, right? This is where I can, as a rep, open up Sidekick. And again, it's going to automatically surface the information that I reviewed. So I don't even need to, let's say I missed the training playlist. Let's pretend I missed every notification, because some reps do. How do I make sure that the information that I've created, those assets that are so powerful for them to send, are still surfaced to them? And so that's where you're going to see that our content to share externally here is going to highlight things. So here it's recommending, hey, you might want to share this video on deal rooms. And immediately they're going to get trust because they can see how many internal views there are, how many times it's been shared already. It looks like a lot of people are sharing it, and when it was last updated. And so here, if you have this video that you created, they can, again, just add that to that deal room really quickly here. And I'm just going to go ahead and add it to the qualified deal room. Boom, boom, I've added it. Or, of course, you might have internal knowledge related to that, where if I click on Spekit Deal Rooms, this is information that you cannot share externally. You'll see here that there's additional information that might be relevant, like that initiative's overview, et cetera. So the whole goal is that AI is taking all that work, Sidekick is taking all that work out of your reps' needs and surfacing the exact content they need, organized by themes. And then here you'll see that Spekit also automatically surfaced the deal room that the rep had for this particular customer. It takes literally seconds to create. I'll preview it just so you guys can see, but really the goal is that they can easily click that link, and you'll see here that that video that was recommended is now in that deal room, so that they can share that with their buyer, personalized to them. I'll show this example here, and with a quick high-level exec overview, and that video here is surfaced to them as well. So the goal is that it's really, really simple for your reps to do everything they need in one place. And then, of course, get the notifications on who's looked at the deal room, et cetera, which I don't have time for since we're at time. But the goal is that your product launch actually now is converting into how reps are working in their day-to-day. It's not an event. It's not a one-time thing. It's now part of how they're working, where all that information that you created is naturally getting reinforced in their flow of work. And then next time, or maybe as a follow-up, we'll share a little bit how you can create knowledge checks and quick reinforcements for that too. So with that, going to head back here to the deck. We do have a product launch template that has a lot of what we discussed. And AI features. I will also be sharing a deal room with a lot of the materials that we covered today and examples. But if you have any questions on this, if you want best practices, feel free to reach out, especially if you're a Spekit customer. We have a lot of our internal templates that we're happy to put in Spekit for other customers. So if you want access, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you very much. And then again, my book can be accessed at justintimeenablement.com, where I talk about a lot of general best practices, where the world is going, and really things for you to consider as you're rebuilding your enablement program for an age of AI. So thank you so much for the time. Jeanna, thank you so much for stepping in, and looking forward to hearing from you all soon.
Thanks.